Welcome, readers of the world. We are back for another episode of Indie Reads Aloud. I'm so glad you guys keep coming back. We're in our fourth season, and I couldn't be more thrilled to share all these amazing authors and stories with you. Today, a new to me author is going to be on the program. Her name is Ashley Grant. She comes all the way from the east side of the country and she writes dark fantasy. Welcome, Ashley.
Hi, thanks for having me on the show.
I'm so glad you could be here. This is so cool. I think Zoom is an amazing adventure because we get to meet people normally we wouldn't have access to. So thank you very much for showing up and playing my game.
I'm I'm just happy that to be here and thank you so much for the invite.
My pleasure. So Ashley was born in Maine. She comes from a New England military upbringing, Coast Guard, right?
Yes.
And that took her to many states all across the country. She gained a love of horror from her father through Vincent Price movies such as Last Man on Earth, and that helped to shape her into the author she's become. She currently resides in Virginia with her husband and their cats and dogs, and who knows what other creatures running around the house, right? Also, you told me in the green room that your husband is a Navy veteran. So I
Yes.
want to acknowledge him and I want to say thank you for your service because you served. It means my son isn't required to. And I see that as a tremendous honor. So please, when your husband listens to this, make sure he listens to this part especially. Thank you.
I
Thank you.
will make sure that I share it with him. Thank you so
Right.
much.
Yeah. So today on today's program, I want to let everybody know that there is a listener advisory for mature situations in this book. It is dark fantasy. So if you are listening with little ears nearby, you might want to preview this episode before you let the little ones hear it, just to be on the safe side. I try to be as transparent as I possibly can with the program. Ashley, tell me, what was it that got you first interested in writing? I know you told us that in your bio that Vincent Price and film kind of ushered your way to the horror fantasy genre, but what was it that said you needed to put words to paper?
You know, I've always just been writing. Writing has always been my emotional outlet. I think especially with the upbringing that I had where I was just shuffled from place to place, it just made things easier on me, although I did stop writing for a very long time. And it was in my late 20s when I started picking it up again. That's when I started getting published.
So what was the first book that was the biggest influence on you?
Ooh. Probably Stephen King's Pet Cemetery.
Okay, that was definitely an influence for me, but I think maybe in a different way. What was it about that story that really grabbed you?
Um, when I was living in Cape May, New Jersey, which I lived there for like 12 years straight. I was within walking distance to the public library of my neighborhood. And I was there so often that the librarian knew me. And I was just getting into that age where I was no longer interested in Goosebumps and like the kids' horror novels. So, and she knew me well enough to know what I would like. And she was also a very big horror fan. So I finally asked her when I was about 10, do you have anything else that's actually scary? So she took me over to the adult fiction section, pulled out Pet Cemetery, and handed it to me.
Well, a librarian gave you Pet Cemetery at 10?
Yes.
Okay, that's a brave adult. Wow. Okay. Um, yeah, the Pet Cemetery scared me, and I saw it when I was 20, on the screen, and then I didn't believe that Stephen King actually did what he did with it, so I had to go and read the book, and I scared myself all over again. So I'm very careful when I read Stephen King. I have read quite a bit of him, but I have to be careful. I have to do it in like broad daylight, out in the middle of the sunshine, you know. Can't read him at night. Um, so if you I love asking this question of authors because I get so many different answers. If you could have dinner with an author and ask them anything in the world, what would be the question and which author would you ask?
Any author at all, wouldn't matter what kind.
Alive or dead?
Ooh, um, would probably have to be Edgar Allan Poe, as stereotypical as he is. Um, and I would probably just, I'd have to ask him, where he got just his format and his prose from, because his work is so beautiful.
Mm. Yeah, he is very lyrical. He's spooky lyrical, but yeah, I love his work too. Good answer. Okay. Tell me about your book. If the King Falls, give me the background to the story. What's your synopsis?
Okay. If the King Falls, which I will hold it up as much as I can in the
Yep.
camera, um, is the story of a dark king from a magical kingdom who goes on an epic quest because his heart is removed from his castle, and his heart is a black diamond, which is at the center of his power. So he must go on this quest to find his heart before the last of his kingdom is destroyed.
Okay, that sounds really interesting. Yeah. Now, in the green room, you told me that it's kind of a cross between Labyrinth meets Sandman, so it's modern day dark fantasy, right?
Yes, it is.
Awesome. I think this is going to be super fun. I'm looking forward to hearing you read. You're going to start from chapter 1. Do I understand that correctly?
Yes, I am.
Fantastic. Okay, when you are ready, Ashley Grant, please take the microphone and read aloud from If the King Falls.
Give me just one moment so I can. There we go. Chapter 1. Stepping lightly on the black squares, the regal figure looked at the slowly ticking pocket watch being warmed by the skin of his right palm. Glancing at the marble stones marking the courtyard, he frowned, putting the watch back into his midnight blue coat. Cracks spread out in random spiderweb patterns, trying to breach the white squares in the courtyard. He needed to leave. He had to find the thief, or the whole castle would crumble. Stepping sideways, the weakened caretaker glanced at the impressive Gothic structure behind him. Massive dual towers loomed over the square courtyard. The multiple shades of yellow, red, blue, and green from the windows glimmered down on the man walking towards the courtyard. The palace's thick entryway opened its doors, tried to beckon the owner forward with the carved roses lining the doorway. Looming over the deceased vegetation, the mighty castle shook all its windows in unison, making the concerned monarch look back. Sensing the despair flowing from the mighty Gothic castle, he tried to make his home see reason. I must go. That person stole my heart. There's no one else to retrieve it. He stopped at the edge of the gate, looking at the statues scattered around. A tear dripped down his face. His kingdom immobile, his people gone, with no army left. Why had this thief taken his heart and not his crown, like so many before them? Gasping in sudden pain, the king gripped his chest, feeling the emptiness spread like ice in his veins. Where are you? The crown, accented with amethyst and onyx jewels, shot out one of the gems from the center, giving off a light for its owner to follow. Stopping, the dark king widened the beam. The crown had found his heart. But first, he needed to study this enemy, the one who dared to sneak into his palace. At first, the king thought his power had failed. There was no image of any person or people at all. A large white hoop stood, spinning in slow motion in front of him. Squinting at the hoop, the circle's full view was facing towards the king. He caught glimpses of another nation, a tree, to be more specific, with white flowers. Grimacing, he knew now that his heart had fallen into the power of his worst rivals. The White Kingdom, so far from here. Too far. I can't use the gem in my crown to teleport into that realm. Sighing in annoyance, the king looked on. The amethyst had used its power. Watching the gem shudder, he ripped the stone from his circlet. Tossing the gem into the air, he watched it shatter. The dust swept into the breeze. The Dark King turned back to the morning castle, his decision swift. With his left hand stretched out towards the east tower, shaking his head. "Forgive me," the king said, not taking his eyes from the tower. The glass window pane broke first. Falling onto the stones of the courtyard, the castle shook, cobblestones screaming, roaring from the betrayal. Multiple stones bashed into the courtyard, intent on taking their monarch down with them. Diving past the falling rubble, the king growled in frustration, not expecting this resistance from the castle. Gasping with burning lungs, the bloodlust from the king's tower finally ended, his courtyard ruined, leaving broken statues and rubble everywhere. Only a single diagonal path of black squares leading to the main gate had survived his fight against the palace. "Do you now see reason? I'm sorry, but I had no choice, unless you want me dead." The Dark King scolded the palace, almost expecting the building to speak. With a thud loud enough to spread past the front courtyard, the castle doors closed, slamming shut, locking the king out. "I'll return as soon as I can. You know that," the king promised, turning from the rubble. Walking out of the arched iron gate, he left the castle grounds for the first time in eons, bowing his head in respect for the palace's diminishing power. The Dark King focused his energy, ignoring the pain slowly creeping back into his chest. He held his silver circlet out in both hands. Narrowing his eyes, the king focused on the empty center, watching the missing amethyst become replaced by a deep red garnet. Scanning the road, the overgrown bramble of vines covered more of the path. Climbing over the worst of the thorns, the Dark King marched away from his kingdom, stomping on every vine his sharp-heeled boots could break. Shining behind, the iron gates grew smaller in the distance, as the king's feet kept walking along the checkered path, pointing onward until the weeds and thorns blocked the stones. Only the outline of the damaged tower could be seen in the distance. Bramble and thorns kept covering the ground, expanding out into tree trunks lining what remained of the road. His steps slowed, wincing. The thorns grew longer, scraping against his leg. Dripping into the soil below, blood fed the vines. "You won't stop me." Stomping down hard, the Dark King waved his hand over the brush, fixated on the ground. Warmth spread into his palm, the area coated in shadow, leaving the king glowing without any source of light. With a puff of white sparks, fire burst from his hand, setting every plant covering the road in flames. Smoke rose above his head. The Dark King let the air clear on its own. Watching the fire spread out, the king's magic was determined to rid the path of any overgrowth for miles. Alternating black and white stones returned, marking the way for the vagabond royal's long journey. The path, however, was wrong, cutting straight in a direction opposite of the White Kingdom. Should I shuffle the stones or separate them into different roads? Looking behind him at the blurry castle, the king couldn't stop thinking about the collapsed tower. "I can't use more of my magic to force open the path without risking the castle," the king realized. "I'll have to let fate decide." The king filled his lungs with air, the smell of ash still overwhelming but also pleasant to his senses. Clapping once, the Dark King watched all the black and white cobblestones rise, circling around his body. The stones kept spinning, mixing in gray streaks, until they fell once more to the ground. The new path held a dark, cool gray tone that the king didn't recognize, turning sharply ahead. How intriguing! Not only am I being forced to leave my desolate home, but this road shall take me far beyond anywhere I've been before. With no time to waste, the Dark King walked on the narrow stones curving with the sun. The path the Dark King marched down was pulling into a landscape, dimming in varying shades of gray. His white pant legs looked like they were smudged by pencil shavings. His vest seemed washed out. Even the king's decorative collared shirt dulled to the darkest shade before black, leaving the fabric the same slate gray that highlighted the door to the palace. With each mile, his mind felt odd. The Dark King had never experienced such cold spreading into his limbs. The sensations continued, spreading into his mind, leaving him hollow and dead in a way. looking at the few trees scattered throughout the dusty land. The king wished their branches would weep for his suffering. Taking his long black mantle from his bag, the king wrapped the heavy fabric around his body. The weight of the mantle brought his journey to a near crawl, dirt scattered behind him with each step. Folding the fabric into a shawl, the king clasped the mantle again, nodding when the cloth reached his knees. Many gray blocks still lay ahead, giving his feet direction. He scoffed at the depressing image the twisted branches and broken tree trunks made, doing little to break the cracked earth or end the monotony of this bizarre wasteland. There's no way for me to turn back, even if I want to, he laughed, looking at the floating stones behind him, waiting for him to step forward. Dropping his arms, he walks, following the cobblestones with his eyes, landing ahead somewhere the king couldn't see. Shadows matching the shades of his vest stood, or hovered, rather, while the king shook his head at the current end of the path. Closing his eyes, the king didn't need to read minds to know the people slowly gathering were curious about his floating road. Rubbing some of the stiffness away from his ears, the feel of metal surprised him. Sighing at his own forgetfulness, he lifted the silver circlet from its head. Its metal shined, the garnet in its center accented by rose petals, with small onyx stones shining from the center of the flowers. Laughing at the power his crown wanted to unleash, the Dark King tied the rebellious piece to the inside of his distinguished mantle. Hush, we don't know anything about this kingdom or its people. You have no reason to frighten them, yet. This seemed to settle the crown. The vibrations buzzing against his side dwindled until the circlet fell asleep, its powers no longer noticeable to anyone except its owner. In minutes he reached the small group, watching in amusement as many hands stretched upwards towards the stones floating in the air, waiting for him to continue. That won't work, the king informed his distracted audience, his voice full of concern. The group turned to him, staring in unison. There were maybe 20 people around him. All were covered in thick layers of dust, some with short cropped hair, others with long locks. It was difficult for him to notice anything that stood out among these people. They continued watching him in silence. What is the name of this kingdom? I wish to pay my respects to your realm's ruler, he stated, looking around. The king's words made these people uneasy. In confusion, he watched most of the clan slowly back away from him. Murmurs filled the group as the taller members whispered to each other. Keeping what he could of his composure, the lone royal pushed away the subconscious part of his mind that felt just as put off by these strangers. It has no name. The wasteland isn't a kingdom. A young child's voice rang out. This isn't a country? The Dark King asked, watching the little girl walk forward, staring up into his eyes. Her dirty bangs dropped in front of her eyes, swaying as she shook her head at his question. This is nothing, the girl answered, with such certainty he was taken aback at her reply. Why do you all stay here? This desert only has dead trees. Those can't sustain you. His argument was met with more curious stares. We eat from the land, stranger, an adult voice called out from the back of the group. How? It doesn't seem like your land grows much, if any food at all. At his side, the king's circlet began to stir again, pressing into its owner's ribcage. He glanced at the child standing before him. It's as they say, we eat from the land. She moved away from the Dark King, stepping 3 feet from the path and its paved stones still orbiting above the group. The king watched every movement the child's body made, waiting for the reveal of whatever magic these people used. The little girl fell to her knees, digging tiny fingers into the ground. She piled the dirt towards her, shoving handfuls of the topsoil into her mouth. In silent awe at the useless act, the king stood dumbfounded, while the rest of the group joined the child. Bowing his head in defeat, the Dark King turned away from the small array of people. The sound of stones falling, forming the road to his heart, alerted the group to his departure. You're not staying with us? One of them asked. No, the king replied. We have room for you, stranger, the little girl informed him. That is very kind, but I have somewhere I must be. Gripping his now quivering crown to stop its impending attack, he left the odd and terrifying circle to their feast. Relief flowed through him when the stones pulled up behind him, preventing any of them from following his trail. His steps slowed. The dead plants were now joined with thick brush, and treacherous curves, creating large circles. The stones laid perfectly between the folding branch limbs. The king lowered his palm. Feeling the cool stone under his fingers, he rose again. He shook his head at the idea of crawling on his hands and knees, gazing upward at the trees, their limbs swaying, stopping the wind from reaching his body. The swaying shadows began a dancing puppet show between the leaves. Undoing the leather buckles on the top of his boots, the king carried his boots in his left hand, reluctantly stepping on the ground with bare feet. Cold stone lay under the skin. Walking at a slower pace, the dark king's toes curled on cracked, unforgiving stone, striking out as his heel misstepped. Grunting from pain, he was lucky that was the only injury was two of his toes, not something worse that could leave him in danger, like a broken ankle. The forest was eclipsing behind a night's blanket, with little daylight for the landscape. Sprinting, the king pressed on, trusting the feel of the stone path beneath him. The path started to twist in different directions. Running over the rough road, the king quickly pulled his boots back on, the pavement crumbling under every step he took. Swaying with the last curve, the dark king sighed, catching his breath. The sun peeked out on the horizon. Its brilliance filled the king's eyes with something he'd never seen before. A different hue broke out against the gray sky, bursting with fire. Soaking in the sun's ambient orange light, the king was filled with a desire to be closer to the source. Swirling rays shot out into the sky, the brilliant covers he'd never seen before, drawing the dark king to the west. Ignoring all the strain in his muscles, letting his irises soak in something other than his monochrome existence.
Thank you very much. That was a wonderful reading. Super cool, really super visual. Um, not which of the main characters, but which of the subplot characters in this story is your favorite and why?
Probably the Lady Elder. She is a character that shows up later in the book. She is one of the characters that is from the group in chapter 2 that he meets, the Earth Eaters. They end up becoming his allies at the end of the book, and she is their leader. In the
I
second book, she has a much bigger role to play. In the second book,
okay.
one of the main
So
characters.
you gave her payoff in the second book.
Yes.
Yes. I love this idea of Earth Eaters. I just think that's very, very cool. It's a neat concept. So tell us about the next book and when do you expect it's going to be out so that we can read it as well?
There's no hard publication date for the next book. This book was just released in April. So
So this is still a
and
new baby book.
yes.
That's fantastic. Congratulations. So you're working on writing the second.
Yes.
And do you see this as building into a trilogy or a series? What's
I'm
the idea, the long
trying,
term for
I'm
this?
trying to make it into a trilogy as of right now, but I am a complete pantser. So it might be a trilogy, it might end up being a series. The plot that I have so far is leaning more towards a trilogy. What I can say is that the second book, the Dark King is not the main character. The main character is one of the Dark King's daughters.
Okay, super fun. That's awesome. You've also written another book. Tell us a little bit about that.
Empty Cargo was my debut novel from last year. It is a Dracula book from the perspective of Renfield.
Okay, that's a cool idea.
Yes, and the
I
entire thing takes place on the Demeter for anyone
nice. Okay.
who's a diehard Dracula fan.
Would you be willing to come back and read that for me?
Yes.
I would love that. That would be super cool. Thank you so much for coming on the program today, and I look forward to having you come back. And good luck and much success with If the King Falls.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.